So, welcome to today's video about cobalt blues. And you can see that there are a lot more pigments than in some of the other videos. We have the PB28 cobalt aluminum oxide, which is the biggest group of cobalt blues. Then we have the PB72 cobalt zinc aluminate. I only have one of those. And the PB73 cobalt silicate. Sadly, I don't own a color with that pigment because none of the major brands offer cobalt blue with that pigment. And we have the PB74, which I have 4 different to swatch for us. That's cobalt zinc silicate. And we also have the PB32 smalt or cobalt glass. And that's the pigment we start with the smalt. I will first swatch the smalt hue from Winsor & Newton Professional. I wanted to include it for comparison reasons. I personally like the hue, which is made with PB15, so ultramarine violet. I like it very much. It's a lot more bluish than the traditional ultramarine violet. I like it as a color on its own. But when you compare it to the real smalt, then you see that it's that they are not similar at all. PB32 smalt is the oldest cobalt pigment which is used by us. So in all of our human history, that's the oldest cobalt pigment. And there are ceramics and other stuff which date around 2000 BE. So like from ancient Egypt, which include paintings on the ceramic with that pigment, with the PB32. So it's a really, really old pigment known to mankind. And it was used a lot, especially in stuff like ceramic porcelain stuff, but also in drawings, especially around the 17th hundreds century, because it's much cheaper than lapis lazuli. And lapis lazuli, or ultramarine, made with the real lapis lazuli, in that time it couldn't be produced synthetically like it's today. So you could either buy the real lapis lazuli when you wanted an ultramarine, or you bought the cheaper version, which is smalt. And depending on how high the cobalt concentration is in that cobalt glass, it varies from very light blues to dark ultramarine-like blues. That's why it was used so much. And you see that a lot in old paintings when you look, for example, paintings around the 16th century. There are a lot of paintings where this pigment is used. And the problem why it's not used today anymore is it's not light fast. It loses its blue color completely, and behind it leaves a brownish color from middle browns to very dark brown. So it's a lot different after a while from what you originally wanted to have. And of course, cobalt is normally a light fast, but the problem is that the potassium leaves the particles over time, and without the potassium, because of the changed surroundings, the cobalt isn't light fast in that arrangement, so it loses its blue. And essentially, smalt is with cobalt oxides colored potassium silicate glass. And you can feel it when you paint with smalt and then touch the dry color. It has this like sandpaper feeling because of the big glass particles. That's also the reason why it granulates really, really strongly. So, okay, now we started with the PB28s. The first one I swatched was from Rembrandt, and the next I will swatch is from Paul Rubens. PB28 we also know from the Cobalt turquoises. It's very light fast, semi-transparent, moderately staining, dark violet, moderately intense blue with a large drying shift, so it is a lot darker when wet in comparison to what it is in dry, when it's dry. It's listed on handprint as a top 40 pigment. And like I mentioned in the cobalt turquoise video, that depending on, it's on cobalt oxide, and depending on which other metal is in the mix with that cobalt oxide, the color changes. So it can either be the turquoises or the blues, for example. So the next one I swatch is from White Nights. PB28 is your standard cobalt blue. Sorry. And you will find it in most brands. Only some brands who don't offer toxic pigments, like cobalt pigments, then you will maybe find in hue, but that's very easy to get cobalt pigment. And that the next one is that's the tube from Rosa Gallery, also cobalt blue PB28. What I've personally experienced is that with the PB28 cobalt blue, the most brands are very, very similar to each other. So with the cobalt greens, for example, you have seen maybe in my latest video that even with the same pigment, you can get completely different shades of green. Yeah, you can get a very light green, or you can get a very deep green, which reminds like the typical green from any kind of needle tree, like your typical Christmas tree, for example. I'm sorry, I don't know the English names for all the types of trees, but it is the best comparison I have from the range from greens, and that is something we don't find in PB28 cobalt blues. So you don't need to buy like 5 different brands to get all the different shades. You are just fine with buying only one of those, depending on where you live, what you can get easily, or for you, what you can get cheapest, for example. So the next one I swatched from the Mijello Mission Gold dot card. This is Cobalt Blue #2, and that is very important because Mijello has some colors as a #1 and a #2, and it's always one is the original one, the genuine one, and the other is a hue. And please be aware of that. If you want to buy colors from Mijello and you want something like a cobalt blue, which they offer as a #1 and 2, then look up which is the real deal and which is the hue, because I made that mistake in the past with the cerulean blues. They also have a number 1 and number 2 there, and the one is the real deal, and the other one is an phthalo blue, and not a light one, so that it is similar to a cerulean blue, just a normal regular phthalo blue. And yeah, I was really annoyed with myself after I got the wrong one. So please be aware of that. Don't make the same mistake as I. So the one I even swatched just now is the Daniel Smith version. And the next I will be swatching is from Shinhan PVC, or no, it's not it's PWC. I make this mistake all the time. Sorry about that. I don't know which brand is cheapest at your place, but for me personally here in Germany, Shinhan PWC is the cheapest if you want the cheapest price per milliliter. So 50 milliliter tube from Shinhan in Germany depends on 3 to maximum of 6 euros. So it's very, very cheap. And especially if you say you are on a budget and you want buying pigments like cobalt pigments, which are traditionally very expensive, then I really can recommend looking up which brand is the cheapest at your place, so that you can save a lot of money. Because if I buy, for example, the Cobalt blue from Daniel Smith, I'm more have to spend like 20 euros here in Germany. So yeah, or even 25, depending on which cobalt pigment, for example. And that's just for you to know that there is a wide range in how much you have to pay for a tube or a pan. And for me here in Germany, Rosa Gallery and Shinhan PWC are by far the cheapest ones. And it is just wherever you are in the world, it can be different. So look it up. You can save a lot of money spending a bit of time to search through your shops and look which one is the cheapest for you. The next one I will be swatching is from Schminke Horadam. It's Cobalt Blue Light, and that is also important, the light, because when companies have a Cobalt Blue Light and a Cobalt Blue Dark, they traditionally or mostly offer the PB28 as the light one and the PB74 as the dark one, and they look a lot different. That is why it's so important to be sure which one you want to buy, to look it up, that you don't buy the one you don't want to. So the next one is from a company of Belgium called Blocks, and you see they have these very, very big, beautiful ceramic pans, which offer all the information on the back side, and you even get a fancy brush rest included on the pan. I must say they are super expensive, but they are, I think they are very beautiful, and also you can later, if you ever completely use it up, have a beautiful mixing well as well. And you see, now I stacked a Gansai pan, a full pan, and a half pan. How big these pans are! They are really, really, really big. It says 18 milliliters in that big pan. The company also does offer tubes and normal pans, but funny thing is I can buy the tubes here in Germany, which is really funny because Belgium is one of our neighboring countries. But I can get the normal pans or this big ceramic ones, and I love the ceramic ones. I don't own very much from them because they are really, really expensive. They are normally somewhere between 20 to 30 euros per pan. And the PB28 from Blocks is the only one I personally say it's very, very different in hue to all the other ones. So if you like that particular shade, then you have to buy the Blocks one. Then the next one is called Aquarius Cobalt Blue from Roman Schmal. And that's the only PB72 I have. It's also the only company I know which offers a PB72. And when I say the only company, I mean, of course, the only from the major brands you can buy in every shop. And I don't mean people who artisans who are making paints with their hands by themselves at home. So that said, we are changing to the PB74s, starting also with Roman Schmal. It's called Cobaltblue Deep. And you will see that this cobalt blue pigment is a lot darker than the PB28 ones. It is very, very similar in its color shade to an ultramarine blue. So if you are on a budget, or if you say you just don't want to spend a lot of money for your paints, then that's a pigment you personally can overlook, because it's much more expensive than an ultramarine blue, but very, very similar in hue. It does granulate more than an ultramarine blue, even a French ultramarine, which granulates tannins more than the normal ultramarine does. But like I said, they are very close in hue. So that's one just for pigment nerds and collectors like myself. Or the only other thing I say, which you can do very, very damn it, today I'm very sorry. My brain doesn't work that good today. If you like mixing your own supergranulation colors, like the Schminke supergranulation colors, this is a very interesting mixing pigment because of its very, very strong granulation. That's what I wanted to say. Very sorry. The one I swatched just now was the Cobalt Blue Dark from Blocks, and that one is the only one which is different in hue, in its color hue, in its shade, to the other PB74s. So that's a shade on its own. The next one will be Cobalt Blue Deep by Winsor Newton Professional. Yeah, so because of the very strong granulation, you can't see it that good because it's a very smooth, cheap cellulose paper I use for these videos. But when you use a beautiful, like cold pressed, doesn't matter if it's cellulose or cotton, but with a nice cold pressed texture, then you will see, of course, the granulation a lot more than you will see that here. Also, you will probably need to add a little bit more water than I've used here. The last one of the PB74s is the Cobalt Blue Deep from Schminke Horadam. And when I compare all four of the 74s I have, the Schminke is definitely the one with the strongest granulation. So if you are a granulation fan like me and want a lot of different colors which granulates very strongly, and you like to mix your own color separation colors, then if you can get a hold of Schminke for a reasonable price, that would be the one I would personally recommend, because, like I said, the granulation is a lot stronger than on the other ones. But when you look for the color shade, the Roman Schmal, the Winsor Newton, and the Schminke ones are very, very similar to each other. Like I said, the Blocks one is a little bit different. So yeah, but also only you don't really need that pigment, because you can easily replace it with any kind of ultramarine, which is definitely a lot cheaper than the Cobalt Blue Deep. And that said, I included a swatch of ultramarine, which I will do next, from Winsor Newton Professional, your very typical PB29 ultramarine blue, just for comparison reasons, so that you can really see how close the PB74 and the PB29 are in their hue, in their color hue, I mean, not the lookalike hue. That's why I think that is one pigment you can step over if you really don't want to spend a lot of money, and can easily just work with an ultramarine blue, because they are so similar. PB29 is also the pigment which is traditionally used as an replacement for example, all the cobalt blue hues, which are imitating the PB28 version of cobalt blues. You find it very widely spread along the student grade paints, like, for example, Cotman or La Petite, Aquarelle von Sennelier, or Van Gogh. Those brands mostly use PB29 and any kind of white pigment as a mix. I personally think that those are completely redundant. You absolutely don't need them. I always think it's totally waste of space in a small student grade set when you already have an ultramarine and a white pigment. Why do you need that cobalt blue hue, which looks mostly in most brands just like a more milky version of an ultramarine? So it's not even more beautiful, in my personal opinion. So it's completely redundant. When you only buy student grade paints, just buy an ultramarine blue. Don't waste your money on the cobalt blue hues. They are not even close to the PB28 cobalt blue, and that's what typically most people understand when you say cobalt blue. Then they have mostly the PB28 version in their mind. So the next one I have is a cobalt blue from the Kuretake Gansai Tambi. And I just included it because in Gansai Tambi paints, you often find cobalt green or a cobalt blue, but they don't. They are never made of real cobalt pigments. From the kind of blue, I would think that this is based on a phthalo blue, probably mixed with a bit of white or with some fillers or so, because it doesn't get the dark like a phthalo blue normally gets. So yeah, completely different shade as well. Not even similar to any of those. The next one I have is the La Petite Aquarelle von Sennelier. Their student grade range. It's also a cobalt blue hue. They don't ever offer any kind of pigment information for their student grade paints, but I personally think it's just a very low concentration on PB29, because it's so weak. That's a really, really weak one here. So, sorry. Also, not even close to any any of the cobalt blues. It's just a very watered down ultramarine. So the next one is better said, the last one is the cobalt blue hue from Winsor Newton Cotman, and they offer pigment information. It's a PB29 mixed with PB5, and that's your typical cobalt blue hue, which you find among all the brands. Like I said, completely redundant color. Just use your ultramarine blue. You're much more in a better place with the single pigment version. You don't need the mixture ones. Yeah, you can see that hopefully now that the 74s, for example, except the blocks one, are very similar in hue. Also that the 28 ones are mostly very close in hue. There's not that much difference than, for example, in the cobalt green, which you have in the cobalt greens. We have this expansion from Roman Schmal that they offer the PB72, which is not offered by any other brand. But I personally think that the 72 is very similar to a PB36 cerulean blue. So probably just interesting for people like me who likes to collect pigments, pigment nerds, or color collectors, something like that. You can probably replace it very easily with a PB36. They are not completely the same, but very similar. So I hope this video was as well helpful to you, that you learned maybe something new, and that it also helps you to decide which shade from which brand is your favorite, so you can choose more easily, and also that you hopefully don't make the same mistakes than I did with the Magello Mission Gold version. So that's why I included that little part as well. Don't repeat the mistakes I made. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. I would be very thankful if you leave me a follow or a thumbs up. It will helps my channel a lot. And I wish you a wonderful day, or a wonderful week, better said. And yeah, I hope you will be watching the other videos as well. I will include all the links in the description box below, and I will try to upload the last from the Cobalt family, the ceruleans, the cobalt blue ceruleans, next week, and then we will switch to a completely new color family. So bye and thank you.